All right, welcome back. Thank you. Welcome back to the Politico 28 Gala Dinner, looking ahead to the power players shaping Europe's political agenda in 2026. Since August, Andrew Puzder has served as President Trump's man in Brussels, representing the U.S. administration's interest here at the heart of the EU. He comes to the role after a long career as a businessman and executive, and he couldn't be here at a more pivotal time for Europe and the transatlantic relationship. We're looking forward to hearing his thoughts tonight. The ambassador will be sitting down with Dasha Burns, Politico's White House bureau chief. She's also the Dasha Burns that interviewed Donald Trump just a few days ago, so she has some interesting perspective to bring. So please help me welcome her and the ambassador to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us here. You know, I had a little chat with your boss a few days ago.
I heard.
He had some words for Europe, United States allies, and for some of the people even in this room. He denounced Europe as a decaying group of nations led by, quote, weak people. I want to hear from you, sir, as you navigate the politics, the policy, the ideology of the European Union, how you see the president's directive to reshape this continent.
When I originally read the news reports on the national security strategy, I thought, oh my God, this thing's pretty bad. Then I actually went and read it, and read the section on Europe, which I would point out to everybody is called a Proposal for European Greatness. It wasn't called, something like, we want to dump Europe, we don't like Europe. It was more, if I can paraphrase President Trump, it was more make Europe great again than it was let's desert Europe. Then if you read down...
MAGA?
Mega, yeah, it'd be mega and mega. Then you go down a sentence and it says that Europe is structurally and culturally vital to the United States. You go down another sentence, it says our transatlantic trade relationship, which is the largest in the world by far, with the EU and the United States, is a pillar of the global economy and American prosperity. Well, if you're talking about Europe as vital to the United States and as a pillar of American prosperity, you're really not talking about separating from Europe. You're talking about Europe as an ally you would like to see become stronger,
Sir,
I think, economically.
Some reassurance to the folks in this room who were concerned about this relationship after what the president had to say?
Yeah, but I just would encourage anybody. Look, the document's 28 pages. It took me an hour to read it, and the section on Europe is like 2 pages. Just read it. It's not what you're hearing. Is not reflected in the actual document. I just encourage you to take a look at it.
Well, I've read it, sir, and it is a pretty significant departure from the posture of the United States towards our allies in the past. The position to see, as Carrie Budoff-Brown said earlier on the stage, a cultivation of resistance to Europe's current trajectory and a real involvement from the United States in the politics and policy of Europe, which traditionally the U.S. has tended to stay out of.
Yeah, I think the major area, look, an economically weak Europe is not in Europe's interest, and it's not in the best interest of the United States. It's not in the best interest of Europe.
Do you think Europe is weak at this moment, sir?
Economically? Yeah, I think Europe's got real problems economically. If you look back 14 years ago, just 14 years, nominal GDP in Europe was ahead of the United States. Now, this year, the IMF says it'll be about 20% below. And if you include the UK, if you exclude the UK, you're looking at 30% below. And the industrial giant of Europe, Germany, has GDP per capita last year that was below that of the state of West Virginia. West Virginia is the 49th lowest state on GDP per capita. If you look at France, Spain, Italy, I'll throw the United Kingdom in just for balance, and the EU generally, GDP per capita is lower than the state of Mississippi, which is the 50th lowest U.S. state. That just shouldn't be. That's just, Germany's much stronger than that. Germany should be a powerhouse, but they're losing business to China. They now import more from China than they send there. Their manufacturing levels are down to 2005. Startups that become successful here go to the United States because the regulatory environment is killing them. So you've got a regulatory framework here that is just smothering businesses and has been for years, and you're now seeing the effect in the economy, which is why, President von der Leyen, by the way, what an intelligent, articulate, charming woman. She's, and President Trump agrees with that. He likes her as well. But that's why she talks about competitiveness and simplification. Professor Draghi came out with a report that said Europe's just not competitive, and also used some GDP comparisons.
But does the president's trade agenda have the potential to further harm Europe's economic prospects?
I don't think there's a country in the world that would have the openness to U.S. markets that Europe will have once we get a final trade agreement. And in fact, once the trade agreement was signed, this was this summer, we had a framework agreement signed in August. And
it's
the
not
United
a done
States,
deal just yet.
We don't have a deal yet, but the United States went to zero tariffs on planes and plane parts, on generic pharmaceuticals, on natural resources like cork that we don't have access to, and took the car tariffs down from about 40%, where he had taken them to 15 at the request of the Germans. They had asked, we'd like the tariffs to come down. We did all that, and by the way, the tariffs on the United States haven't changed one iota, because there's a process here you have to go through in Europe. It's very slow, and it's frustrating for the United States. We'd like to see the deal move forward and get implemented, and I think it would be good for both countries.
I think one question on the minds of a lot of folks in this room and beyond is, does this administration see the EU as necessary?
Well, yeah, the president wouldn't have sent me here, I don't think, if he thought the EU was unnecessary. He sent me here because of my business background. He's a good friend, a good man, and asked me to come be the ambassador to the EU to work on these economic issues, because with my business background, I would have a better understanding of how these issues would affect the economy here overall, and could represent the interests of American businesses. And you end up, when you represent the interests of American businesses, particularly with respect to deregulation, you also represent the interest of the European businesses, who often come to see me and say, God, can you help us with this regulatory maze that we're facing? So I do think the president believes it's relevant. And like I said, we have the largest trade relationship in the world. Getting this trade agreement done is incredibly important, and I actually think President von der Leyen did a very good job negotiating with the president.
Before I let you go, and we're a little over time here, can you send a message to the people in this room, to the Europeans that are paying such close attention to everything that the president is saying and doing, so many things that you are saying and doing? Can you be the sort of transatlantic translator here and explain to folks here what you take away from the president's message to me just earlier this week, when he did share some very harsh words for Europe?
I think the president would like to see a Europe that is capable of defending itself, that is able to help the United States across the globe when we deal with bad actors in different places. I think he'd like to see a strong trade partner that we can both benefit. All of that requires a strong economy, and some strong words about things that need to be corrected are not completely inappropriate. I will say he met with Prime Minister Starmer, President Macron, and Chancellor Merz like yesterday or the day before, and his comment was they're very good leaders and they're good friends. So it's not, he doesn't have a disdaining opinion for everything about Europe or everyone in Europe, and I think he would very much like to see Europe be the dynamic, vital, just imagine if Europe became, this center of Western civilization, within, 500 or 1,000 miles of us, these incredible accomplishments that have lifted the world, lifted Western civilization and humanity as a whole. Wouldn't it be great if this part of the world, instead of deciding it was going to be the world's regulator, decided once again to be the world's innovators? If you're the innovators, your economy is going to grow, GDP per capita will grow, you'll be stronger in the world, and you'll be a much better trade partner and ally to the United States. So it's in all of our interests.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for being here, for answering many of our questions, and thank you all for joining us as well.
Thank you, Dasha.
after you.
Thank you very much, Dasha and Ambassador Puzder. I'm joined on stage by my colleague, Marion Solite. We've been debating all night about.
My name's
I'm not gonna let everybody in on this, but Solite. Marion is Politico's editor-at-large in France and the author of this year's P28 list. Welcome, Marion.
Thank you.
I brought Marion on here because I think it's a good opportunity, before you introduce us to the next guest, I want to talk about the P28 list. You were the person on behalf of Politico who led the curation of this list. What stands out to you most?
It's a tough assignment. I would say, obviously, as you've already discussed, the fact that the number one on the list is not a European this year won't have escaped anyone. I think, when we first considered putting Trump at the top of the list, we never really came back on that idea, and that was because we couldn't really find any leader having a bigger impact on Europe now or in the months to come. And maybe we'll be proven wrong. That's part of the fun. More broadly, if you look at the 27 other nominees, I think what's very striking is really the crumbling of the kind of traditional political order in Europe. Obviously, polarization, radical figures really breaking through on the left and on the right. But also, figures within mainstream traditional parties rethinking, questioning old party lines.
And to that point, I'd love for you to just tell us, how does that show up on this list?
Well, if you look at the number 2, for instance, Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, she comes from the left, but she has also ruffled feathers within her own camp with a very tough line on migration. The number 3, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, has partly lifted the debt brake, which used to be a symbol for German fiscal orthodoxy. So as you said, the ground is shifting, and the ones who survive or thrive politically are the ones who adapt to this new reality or even leverage it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Marion. I'm going to leave it to her to please introduce our next guest.
Yes, thank you, Carrie. Our next guest is an economist. He's a professor at the Paris School of Economics and at the University of California, Berkeley. He has been driving the debate around tax evasion and inequalities domestically and internationally. His latest proposal for a 2% tax on households worth more than 100 million euros has put him front and center to the budget debate in France. But he has made headlines long before that in the US during the 2020 campaign, working with politicians like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Please help me welcome on stage Gabriel Zucman, Director of the EU Tax Observatory. Hi, Mr. Zucman.
Hello.
Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you have experience with political debate in the US, in France. Tell me, which one is the craziest, French or American politics?
Both are crazy in different ways. What I particularly like with US politics is the ability to make new figures emerge, very quickly. Think of Zoran Mamdani, for instance. Nobody knew about him.
You picked that
a year
coincidence.
Ago. and he's a source of inspiration for millions of people now, and he's mayor of New York. And that, I think, is really one big strength of US politics.
American dynamism. You were telling me backstage, and I hope I'm not divulging any secret, but that you actually knew US Ambassador Puzder. You've already debated him on stage. And actually, when the ambassador crossed paths with you, he told you, good luck with everything except the wealth tax.
Yes, we had a debate in the US in 2019 when Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren were pushing ideas for wealth taxation, and I was working with them at the time. And Ambassador Puzder at the time was very much against, and I think he's still against, proposals for wealth taxation. But things have changed. Look, for instance, someone like Joe Biden, who in 2019, 2020 was very much against those ideas, ended up, once president of the United States, putting in his own budget a billionaire income tax, defending it. It passed in the House of Representatives. It almost became law. And I think it's just an illustration of how fast the debate on these questions is changing. It's just the beginning.
Also, I mean, it's changing and it's going in one direction and sometimes going in another direction. If you look at what happened at the OECD level, there was a wide agreement, and then it kind of fell flat this year because of different political currents, let's say.
Well, at least there is now this principle that we can have a common minimum tax. In 2021, 130 countries agreed on the principle of putting a floor to how low tax rates can go for multinational companies. And it's very important because it illustrates that tax competition is not some kind of law of nature. It's a choice that we make, and we can make other choices. Now, it's very important to make sure that we don't have a side-by-side system where US multinationals would be out of the minimum tax because it would give them a competitive advantage and hence a competitive disadvantage for the European Union. So if we want to fight for competitiveness, we need to fight for an inclusive global minimum tax that applies to all multinationals, US, just like the rest.
So no carve-out?
No carve-out, no exemption for any country.
So in your book, you are explaining that when it comes to income tax, there is a sort of black hole at the top of the pyramid, right? Like that the ultra-rich, and we're talking really about billionaires here, effectively pay less taxes than the upper middle class, right? And one thing that is quite counterintuitive is actually, especially true in Europe, perhaps a bit less so in the US. That's what I read in your book.
Yes, and it was shocking when we, the research community, understood that, which is that US billionaires, the US is not famous for its high taxes on the rich, and yet they end up paying more tax than European billionaires. Because here in the EU, the effective income tax rate for the super rich essentially is close to 0%. They, almost all of them, avoid the income tax by using holding companies, to such an extent that all taxes included, our billionaires in the EU pay twice as less tax than the average taxpayer in our countries.
Okay. It's perfect timing to have this debate because the EU is currently thinking through its long-term budget. And it's fair to say everyone is looking for fresh money. So maybe you have suggestions. I mean, how big of a pot of money are we actually talking about here if we take like a European scope, like EU? You have ballpark figures for tax evasion when it comes to Europe?
Yes, I think, look, there are at least two priorities. And number one, there's a lot of money that can be generated by ensuring that billionaires pay as much tax as ordinary taxpayers. With a minimum tax of 2% on the wealth of the super rich, this would generate about 65 billion euros in tax revenue for the EU as a whole. This is according to the computations that we made with my colleagues from the EU Tax Observatory. And there's no reason to wait. We're talking about the wealthiest people in society and those who also are the least taxed. So what are we waiting for? Why do we tolerate this anomaly to continue? And second, there's also significant revenue that we can get by fighting tax evasion, and in particular tax evasion by multinational firms. There's 1 trillion euros in profits that are shifted each year away from Germany, from France, and so on, towards Bermuda and low-tax places. If we tax that money, we can get about 200 billion euros globally in additional tax revenue. So
one very common argument against your proposal that has been raised in France is that it will discourage, start-upers, innovators to be entrepreneurs and, to start their own company because they will be taxed on their shares of the companies. What do you respond to that?
Well, that really doesn't make a lot of sense because innovation does not depend on just a tiny number of wealthy individuals paying zero tax. We innovate, millions of us innovate, not just thousand billionaires. And the notion that someone, age 20, 25, would be discouraged to create a startup, to innovate in AI because of the possibility that once that person is a billionaire, he or she would have to pay a tiny amount of tax. Look, who can believe in that? That really makes very little sense.
One last question, but we talked about the US and we listened to the ambassador. You might have seen that we had a wide-ranging interview with Donald Trump where he heavily criticized European leaders, and he said the US economy was doing great. As an economist working across the Atlantic, what's your assessment of the economic situation there?
No, I think these stories about the US economy doing much better than EU, by and large, are mistaken. If you look at productivity, productivity per hour worked, meaning GDP divided by the number of hours worked, it's the same in the EU as in the US. It's 60 euros per hour, corrected for differences in purchasing power parity, and it's evolving at the same pace. It's true that nominal US GDP is growing faster, but that's because there's more inflation in the US. The price index is growing faster. Population is also growing faster. Once you correct for that, the US is not doing better. Let me just add that one of the big parts of the explanation for why the US has a higher GDP per capita is because the top 1% is extraordinarily rich in the US. Now, if you look at average income for the bottom 99%, the vast majority of the population, there's also much less of a gap between Europe and the US.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time. And I'll welcome back Carrie on stage. Thank you, Mr. Zucman. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. All right. Coming in at 17 on the P28 list is Teresa Ribera, first Executive Vice President of the European Commission for a clean, just, and competitive transition. As the second most powerful person in the Parlement, Ribera isn't shy about her position on the EU's digital market, competitive edge, and what it will take to protect that. Sitting down with the Executive Vice President is Politico's own Zoya Sheftalovich, fresh from Australia, our new Chief EU Correspondent. Help me welcome Zoya to the stage.
Good evening, Vice President.
Good evening.
Let's start with an easy one.
Okay.
What is the biggest mistake the EU has made since you became a
None.
European Commission Vice
None.
President? None.
None.
Everything
That was very
perfect.
easy. No, I mean, something that we have missed is to celebrate today the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. I expected you to celebrate the multilateralism, the climate action, and the engagement to a much more fair world. No, I think that the European Union has gone through a complicated year. I think that we know that being in a context where multilateralism seems to be under a skeptical approach, building peace, betting on prosperity and the creation of wealth, which is so important even in this given context where we know that we need to stand up also in terms of defense and taking care of very relevant aspects of our own domestic policy. May be difficult, but I think that the President was very clear. I think that 27 member states acting together is something very serious. So I could never underestimate the capacity to face challenges coming from the European Union. And I think that something that our leaders know very well is that what it is important is to be effective in their responses. So trying to identify how we can build consensus, how we can pay attention to the different concerns that may be real on the ground is relevant, but what it matters is the delivery, and that's what we are trying to do, knowing that we need to move in different directions that were new fields. Defense is a new field. building energy transition is something that we had already started, and it is a great asset in terms of competitiveness. We count on good infrastructures, on good capacities in our corporates and our people, but we need to put things together and update that reality to the external world.
You mentioned the Paris Climate Agreement. It's a 10-year anniversary, but we also know that the US has pulled out, Donald Trump is pulling the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement. Can it really be an effective agreement without the US as a party?
But yes, of course. I mean, I'm sure that there are many people in the United States that still think that this is a great thing in terms of security, in terms of modernization of the business community, investing in a smart manner for long-lasting, profitable business, in cooperation, in gaining political momentum in terms of geopolitics. But look, the rest of the world is committed. So we are more than happy to count on everybody, and with the United States back whenever they want to be back. But we are moving, and the main drivers for market business decisions, market-orientated business decisions, is what about green? What about digital? And I think that we cannot miss that race, those races. I think that it is much better if we can work together, if we can build bridges. But there are many people in the world.
Speaking of building bridges, currently, the European People's Party, the centre-right, is building a lot of bridges with the far-right. Do you think the Socialists and Democrats should vote to bring down the European Commission as a result?
You know that as a member of the Commission, I'm committed to the Commission, to any political family, but I really think that it is important to bear in mind that the very origin of the European project after the end of the Second World War, with the support of the United States, by the way, was this great deal coming from the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, so to join forces to build peace and prosperity. And I think that it is still the case. And I think that being aware of the importance of remaining united and keep on building, making the right bets, and the President said at the very beginning of the mandate, and she repeated once again tonight, prosperity, so competitiveness for our economy, values, security are the main drivers, and there I think that we can find common ground. In some occasions, we don't feel so comfortable with the discussions at the Parliament, but that's part of the political game in the Parliament.
So do you think that it is okay for the European People's Party, for the centre-right, to embrace the far-right in the way they have?
I think that what it is important is to stick to our values, and the best way is to remain united. So it is a little bit more dangerous when we see agreements trying to identify how to lower the bar in terms of remaining united, or to lower the high affection of the people towards high standards, environmental and social standards, peace and prosperity. But I think that this is something that we need to defend, we need to make the case, we need to convince, and of course, we need to ensure that the European citizens, the voters at the European elections and in their countries appreciate and back these options.
You mentioned competitiveness, so let's turn to the competition element of your portfolio. Your predecessor, Margrethe Vestager, threw everything she had in order to try to reduce Google's dominance. She failed. Has DG Competition given up trying to reduce Google's power?
I don't think that the way you have framed the question is fair. I think that my predecessor, as it is in my case, are not only bound by the rule of law, are fully aware of the importance of counting on a level playing field and on the possibility for new incomers to challenge the traditional ones, to avoid abuses in positions of dominance in the market. And yes, coming back to this notion of green and digital being the main drivers of prosperity, but also the risk to accumulate such a big power that it may distort many possibilities to keep on creating wealth through new incomers. By the way, in many cases, small startups coming from the United States saying, hey, it could be good if you enforce the competition tools also in the European market to ensure that we can have a chance to be developing our products. So I don't think that she did anything just to avoid or prevent anyone doing anything, but just sticking to the values, to the mandate, to the treaties, to the rule of law, which is very important, and to ensure that the markets are transparent and that competition plays its role in an open economy market as the European one.
Final question. You've said previously, a round of applause.
That is the Danish competition table for clapping.
You've said Europe is getting bullied by Trump in trade talks over big tech and green rules. Was the EU a weak negotiator in the trade talks?
Why you say that? No, I think that, very honestly, I think that it is very important, as I said, build bridges. I'm a firm believer of the diplomacy of friendship, cooperation, and capacity to build bridges. And there may be different understandings. We do prefer to count on clear rules and fair rules. And I think that this is the way we try to behave, not only defending our own rules here at home, our strengths, understanding and providing this confidence to keep on doing business and appealing in a reliable, stable, and predictable context. New investments or the development or modernization of the current sites, but also understanding that there is this second dimension, the external dimension, building bridges with others.
But the bridges, the US does not seem like it wants to build a bridge right now. We saw the Trump interview. So is there any sense in building a bridge if the other side doesn't want to cross it?
Well, if the other one doesn't want to cross it, there is no way to be effective in terms of bridging. But I think that there are many people in the world that would like to enjoy the bridges to the European Union. 450 million consumers with high standards, not only in terms of effectiveness in economic or industrial terms, also in the social model. Great protection for European citizens in terms of whenever they need to, whatever support coming from the institutions in case of unemployment, in case of education, in terms of health. So I think that this is a very interesting model for those who want to make business, for those who want to move towards the European Union, for those that understand that keeping the opportunity to ensure shared prosperity is a must. Who wants to join the European Union under these conditions? Many people in the world. There may be some that not. Well, tant pis, qu'on dirait en français. Eh?
Thank you, Vice President.
My pleasure. Bye.
Thank you, Commissioner Ribera and Zoya. Now on to our industry panel. The policies of Europe are shaped by many forces: domestic politics, geopolitical diplomacy, and economic demand. As policy, politics, and economics become ever more intertwined, we wanted to convene a discussion of representatives of leading industry partners to unpack what they are anticipating in 2026. To dive into this discussion, please help me welcome Politico's Senior Executive Editor in Europe, Kate Day.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us as we unveil Politico 28 this year. I'm Kate Day. I'm Politico's Senior Executive Editor here in Europe. And I'd like to discuss the buzzword on everybody's mind in Europe these days, competitiveness, and especially, I think, here in Brussels. How can Europe remain competitive on the global stage? How can it attract both the talent and the investment it needs? And what policies from Brussels can help get Europe there? Perhaps what policies from Brussels can hinder getting Europe there? Joining me on stage are Stefan Ulrich, President of Bayer's Pharmaceutical Division, and the President of FPR, which represents the pharma industry. Per Fransen, CEO of venture capital firm EQT, and Vivek Bandreth, Director General of GSMA, which represents the mobile communications industry.
Good evening.
Thank you all so much for being here, and let's dive in. I suppose the most obvious question is, how competitive is Europe? And Stefan, I'll come to you first. How competitive do you think Europe is, and what could it do to become more competitive?
So I'm not going to speak, first of all, thanks for having me, but I'm not going to speak on behalf of every sector, but for the biopharmaceutical sector, one could think that things are actually doing okay, because we have over 2 million employees in Europe. We contribute to the European economy with over 200 billion every year. We invest 50 billion every year and more into research and development. Probably there are very few sectors that do that. Draghi has singled us out as one of those areas where Europe should be really competitive, and unfortunately we're losing ground, and this hasn't started now. It hasn't started with the current political landscape. It's something that's been going on for a long time. Europe used to be the pharmacy of the world. 9 out of 10 new medicines were discovered in Europe. That's no longer the case. Last year, China, for the first time, patented more novel medicines than the United States and then Europe. And Europe is by far now third behind those other two. So that's obviously reason for concern, because if you do not innovate, at some point you're not going to produce, which we have been doing for a long time, and at some point you're not going to have a market. So we're losing competitiveness rather than gaining.
Yeah, and it sounds as though you agree with Ambassador Puzder's assessment that we should aim to innovate. Do you also agree with the premise of his statement that Europe is over-regulated? Is that part of the problem? Is the answer at this point to deregulate, and what specifically would you want Brussels to do?
Yeah, so regulation is something that the pharmaceutical sector is very used to, because we don't sell chocolate bars, okay? So there's a need to regulate quality in our sector. So we're not per se against regulation in our sector, but when you look at what's happening in Europe, still the first thing you want to wonder is there actually an attractive marketplace? So traditionally, the markets between Europe and the US were very comparable. China was an afterthought. So there was a logic of building up industries here, building value chains here. But with time, the American market got much more attractive, while the European one lost attractiveness. So we've lost in market attractiveness. And then in terms of regulation, to us, it's less about being too regulated. The question is, are the incentives right? And do we have a framework that has the right incentives to invest? And that's, for example, capital markets. We're going to hear hopefully from EQT on this. I mean, capital markets reform lack of that is totally stifling innovation in Europe, and every country does what every country wants. So we're not getting much. Support for innovation, so long IP life for Europe that could be sort of like an equalizer to lower prices is not happening. To the contrary, we need to fight to actually keep the current IP as it stands, like now in the legislation. It just came out today, the pharmaceutical package.
Yeah, 5 o'clock this morning.
Which we had to really fight to more or less keep IP provisions as they are. When I was saying, like, guys, this has been already make us fall behind the others. So, and we need to fight to keep what we have. This is not going to make us more competitive. So we need to create that framework, and we need to think about looking at healthcare differently, because we're talking a lot these days about demographics and about what's happening to our retirement system. I can only all invite us to also start looking at our healthcare systems, because they look into a very, very similar abyss very soon, and we need to look at this differently. And if we need more outcome-based healthcare, and the best way to improve outcomes in healthcare is to drive innovation, and innovation comes very much from our sector. So So create a
Yeah.
more attractive system, accelerate to have a better framework, and ultimately, one thing that gets lost, about 1/3 of medicines that get approved today by the FDA in America doesn't even come to Europe anymore. So how do we guarantee also that innovation reaches our consumer? And if we do all of these other things, so create a more attractive and a more accelerated, better framework, let's not forget
Yeah.
that we also serve people in their health.
Yeah. Here, I want to bring you in because you have a perspective on certainly investment, investing in more than 200 companies in Europe. So tell us, how competitive do you think Europe is, and where do you see the main challenges that Brussels may be able to help address?
Exactly. So, our perspective is that, it's a fact that over the last 50 years, the US has produced close to 300 companies with a market capitalization of more than $10 billion. During this time, Europe has only produced 14. So that's the starting point. But the good news is that there's hope. My firm, the firm that I'm running, EQT, is one of those 14 companies. So we were started 30 years ago as part of the Wallenberg sphere of companies. And today we're the largest private markets firm actually in the world outside of the US. We manage some 300 billion euros on behalf of our clients. We have operations in 26 countries. And we're the largest actually early stage investor in Europe in technology and healthcare. And what we are seeing in the dialogue and the discussions with our clients is an unprecedented interest to invest into Europe, to allocate more capital outside of the US, right? We intend in the next 5 years to invest more than 250 billion euros into Europe. So it's, I'd say, a real window of opportunity, a unique moment in time for Europe. So in order to make the most out of that opportunity, what we need to do is really to drive a more business-friendly, more innovation-friendly agenda, so that we can realize the full potential in all of those startups and all of those companies that we intend to invest into over the next years.
So the future for Europe, for you, the optimistic future you paint, is one where Europe attracts some investment fleeing America, comes actually, in fact, to Europe. But it sounds as though you think quite a few things have to change here to get there. And do you have specific examples of things you would want the lawmakers in the room to be listening to and paying attention to?
So, like the perspective that I'd encourage decision makers, policy makers, regulators to take is really the founder-centric perspective, right? How do we help these amazing founders, the entrepreneurs, the business leaders in Europe scale their businesses? If you think about what are the priorities for a company that wants to scale, it's access to capital, it's access to clients, and it's access to talent. So what decision makers should really focus on is to remove friction in all of these areas and drive policies that make our capital markets, our public capital markets, the private markets ecosystem more competitive. And I'd encourage also, all of the European countries not to just wait for things to get better and to get pushed by the European Commission. Start local task forces and benchmark your capital markets to other capital markets that are well functioning across Europe, right? When it comes to access to clients, anything that we can do to drive a more unified Europe, the 28th regime, things like that helps founders more quickly scale their companies, accelerate growth. That's important. And then when it comes to attracting and retaining talent, always ask yourself, how do we keep these amazing people? How do we attract even more talent to Europe? And what do we need to do? What policies do we need to implement? And how can we enable these founders, these entrepreneurs, to really put in place attractive, competitive incentive programs for their talents?
Thank you. Vivek, I want to bring you in. You know something about innovation, representing the mobile sector. I wondered, how innovative you see Europe and how optimistic you are, and maybe particularly on the talent point.
Well, I'd say our situation is a bit more dire. We're not the stars of the Draghi report. We are a sector that requires some addressing. And why? Because we're a foundational sector. We bring connectivity, which serves all areas. And when you look at the numbers, and we're a global association, our members are from pretty much every country and territory in the world. But when we compare Europe to other regions, the numbers are pretty scary. There's about 500 million people connected to the mobile internet in Europe. Of those, only 2% use 5G standalone networks. That number's 75% in China. It's about 25 to 30% in the US. And so you could say, well, does it matter? Do I need 5G? And have an informed debate on whether you like it or not. Well, it matters. It matters to the industrial sectors. Ports in China are automated. Factories use 5G for their automation. We have proofs of concepts in Europe. We have scale in China and the US in these areas. So I think for the whole of the, I would say, the economic development, the availability of innovation, the automation of supply chains and factories, the lack of progress in rolling out these investments in Europe is actually a big handicap. So for innovation, not just for us, but certainly for all those who use ICT or communication and connectivity to develop their companies, we have a problem.
And is the block to something like the rollout of 5G, is that really investment, consensus, the joined up single view across Europe that Pierre was talking about? What do you see as the main obstacle to really accelerating that kind of
I'd say there are two, and I think our expectations from the agenda of work of the Commission and the institutions in Europe for the coming year do give us a chance to address them. You have simplification. We're a very regulated sector. In the customer journey of a mobile customer, you have 34 different regulations that come and fall in place. That can't work. And these are things that are getting simplified in other regions. And the Omnibus, the Digital Network Act are great opportunities for Europe to move, but our expectations are very high in that area. The other side of it is scale. And I think the opportunity to readdress the merger guidelines is essential. In China, you have 3 operators, 450 million customers each. In the US, pretty much 3 operators, 110, 120 million customers each on average. In Europe, you have 100 operators, 5 million customers each. So whatever you do, absorbing fixed costs on such a base cannot be as efficient as our competitors as Europe's competitors across the world.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, but it sounds as though we have some real consensus that the answer is for Europe to seize actually an opportunity from all of your perspectives, I think, and to somehow come together as Europe. So maybe more Europe and less regulation unlocks some of that potential. Does that capture it adequately, do you think? Stefan, maybe you can come in at the end.
If you think about this, we have 500 million people living in Europe that all have buying power. We have some of the best universities in the world that publish some of the coolest science in the world. So there's no reason why this wouldn't work. And we need to get our act together. And instead of trying to complicate our lives and come up with a new bureaucratic idea, we should come up with ways of how we unleash our forces.
I'd agree with that. It's a unique moment in time. I think we have a real window of opportunity here in Europe for the reasons that I mentioned. So that's the good news. I think the reality is also that the pace of change that we're seeing, also because of AI, is faster than ever before, right? So time is of the essence, and I'd encourage everyone to be courageous in terms of driving that more business-friendly, innovation-friendly agenda.
Thank you, and thank you all very much. This has been a fascinating insight into Europe's competitive landscape. Very much appreciate you being here. We're going to take a short break in the program as we enjoy our desserts, and then we'll be back with our final segment in about 20 minutes. Thank you all very much indeed. Thanks.